that new video?
What video?
Rationality Rules.
No, I haven't seen that video.
Rationality Rules made a video about me.
About you?
About me, yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, shit. Okay, that's interesting.
Someone just messaged me and like, whoa.
Hey, it's good for you, man. Good news. Oh, shit. That's some good fun. All right, maybe we can, I don't know, we might have to pause the one that we're reacting to now and maybe go to that one. This is a Vegan Accuses Me of Bigotry by Rationality Rules with 300,000 subscribers, posted 1 hour ago. Let's see.
I think, Stephen, you're a good person. I think so because I have been watching you for the last 5 years. I think you're unintentionally espousing the soft bigotry of low expectation.
Low expectation.
Ouch. That's quite the accusation, bro.
And now that this has been pointed out to you, I am very confident that you will drop the soft bigotry of low expectations. Thank you in advance.
Interesting. Okay. What
Why?
has he done?
Hello, my fellow apes. I hope you are well. Recently, I published a controversial video titled Veganism Will Win, but You're Wrong About Why, in which I expressed 2 objections to what I consider to be the best ethical argument for veganism. Since then, I've received a lot of responses, and I'm going to go through a bunch of them in a few days. Today, however, I want to entirely focus on a response from Adita of the channel Soytheist. Adita accuses me of espousing bigotry,
Adita? That's funny.
endorsing social Darwinism, and of heralding the crop deaths though argument against veganism. Let's just get straight to it.
I'm only going to respond to what I consider the crucial points and not his entire 30-minute video. I'm doing this as responding to the entire 30-minute video would make my video 2 hours long. And that is too long.
That's what she said. That's what she said.
Stephen.
Alright, well, I love the meme, even if you did cut it off a little too soon. But likewise, I'll do the same. Let's skip foreplay.
That's what she said. That's what she said.
Adita begins by addressing my attempt to stillman what the Ethical Altruism Foundation considers to be the best argument for veganism.
But while doing so, he makes a few errors.
And the first premise Adita takes aim at is premise 2. That is, the consumption of animal products harms animals. I emphasise that on a literal reading, this premise is just false, since it's not the consumption of animal products that causes harm, but rather the deliberate acquisition, the intentional and conscious act of attaining the products that causes harm. And to illustrate this important distinction, I presented a scenario, which Adita objected to. Here's the scenario. Now, I use the words deliberate acquisition because it carries the connotation of consciously and intentionally obtaining the product, and not necessarily with currency. If, for instance, I did some gardening for someone on the assumption that they'd cook me fish and chips as payment, or at least part of the payment, then make no mistake about it, I would be deliberately acquiring the fish. But suppose instead that I found a dead fish washed up on the beach and decided to take it home and eat it. In this case, is it fair to say that I harm the fish or deliberately obtain the fish? Well, as far as I'm convinced, the answer is no, and so I just don't see an explicit issue with such an act. To be clear, I've never done this, but given my understanding of ethical veganism, this seems perfectly consistent with it.
No, it is not. You see, Stephen, when you do this, you further the commodity status of non-human animals. You further the notion that animals are some things to be consumed rather than some ones. This notion, in turn, enables people to consume, or to use your words, deliberately acquire the bodies of fish and to consume them.
So, according to Adita, if someone finds a washed up dead fish and decides to consume it, they are furthering the commodity status of non-human animals.
You see, Stephen, when you do this, you further the commodity status of non-human animals.
And the reason such an act furthers the commodity status of non-human animals is because it promotes the notion that animals are some things to be consumed rather than some ones.
You further the notion that animals are some things to be consumed rather than some ones.
But this just doesn't follow, as was pointed out by a commentator. Accepting that a washed up corpse on the beach can be a source of calories does not entail perceiving all fish to be commodities there only to be exploited.
Yeah. Louis here has a point, and you know, it is a, I don't know, I don't want to be harsh on you, Aditya, or anything like that. I don't seem like I'm going against you or something, but I do think that's a pretty weak position to hold. I do think it's not the best. I kind of more agree with this guy. Is his name Stephen? I agree with more Louis and Stephen. I mean, okay, here's where I stand, right? If you pick up a fish from the dead fish from a beach, and you cook that fish and you post it to Instagram and tell everybody how much you love cooking fish and eating fish, then yeah, you probably are contributing to, like, you know, you're encouraging people to do it, right? But if you pick up a fish on the beach and go home and eat that fish, I mean, what's the problem here? How are you contributing to any kind of commodity status of an animal by just picking up a fish on the beach and going home and eating that fish? So I think there's maybe a little bit more to discuss there with this one. But yeah, I think on the surface of it, I understand the criticism and why this one doesn't really match up. But yeah, let's listen to what more there is here.
To think that it does is the equivalent of thinking that recognizing the utility of a dead tree, which can be processed for lumber or used for firewood, somehow necessarily entails seeing living trees as a commodity to be farmed. It doesn't. One could be against the commodification of trees and yet still utilize the medicinal properties of naturally fallen trees.
I think what Aditya's trying to say is that it's comparing trees to animals, right? That alone is a pretty it's not fair to compare plants to animals for like all the reasons that we know. But I understand Aditya's point here is that part of the problem that we have with our society is that animals are seen as things and just things to be used and chopped up and whatever. They're just seen as things. And what Aditya's trying to say is that when we go and continue eating them like roadkill or just some animal washed up on the beach, we're giving everybody the impression that they are absolutely things. But that would only make sense if you were actually going out and showing everybody, hey, look, I'm eating this dead animal. Look what I'm doing. Look what I'm doing. Then you'd be having an impact on the world and showing everybody, yeah, they're just calories, right? But I don't think doing it yourself and just going ahead and doing it, I don't really see that much of an issue, because there's no damage being caused by that, is there?
There is no necessary contradiction here. Anyhow, Aditya moved on quickly, and so we'll have to do the same. Now, some will argue that taking the fish harms other animals that would have otherwise consumed the fish, and while this objection is worth considering, I think it's ultimately nullified by the fact that vegans also harm surrounding animals when they forcibly occupy land to produce and consume crops.
No, it is not the same reason. I have already told you why it is immoral to consume the dead fish washed up on the shore.
Yeah, the context here seems to have unfortunately escaped Aditya, but he's not alone, and so I'll take this as poor communication on my end. To clarify, notice that I brought up crop deaths not as an argument against veganism, but rather as an objection to the objection that taking a dead fish harms animals that would have consumed the dead fish. I thought that my words were pretty clear here, but evidently not, and so again, I'll take this, it's on me. Aditya then turns his attention to my comments on premise 3, that being that the consumption of animal products is unnecessary. Assuming that by necessary we mean that something is required for us to continue living, which is, indeed, how most vegans implicitly define it, I emphasise that this premise is tethered to one's socio-economic and geographic environment. If one's circumstances prevents them from acquiring necessary nutrition from vegan sources, then it seems that they are permitted to consume select and limited non-vegan produce.
This is not true. I have said this multiple times and I will say it again. Only the ultra-privileged think that veganism requires privilege. It is because they think of things like the cost of almond milk. They think that a Starbucks latte is a basic need. It's not.
Yeah, I'm sure that even Gen Z acknowledges that a Starbucks latte isn't a necessity. But what about, say, fish for Inuits? Surely you recognise that there have been, are, and will be some scenarios in which one can only get adequate nutrition if they consume animal produce.
But why are we bringing up Inuits? Like, this is, when you start bringing up like tribes and Inuits and things like that to support your arguments, you're just falling into the same bullshit that, okay, it's still the same shit. It's just you're dressing it up a little bit, you're polishing it off. It's the same thing as someone on the street who's not trained in any kind of philosophical thinking says to try to distract from the reality of like where you are. Right? Like that you're not in the tribe, that you're not an Inuit. You're actually somewhere where it's totally possible to, eat a certain way. This only gets brought up as a distraction, right? So it's surprising to see this guy doing that. Well, it's not surprising, but he does it in a more fancy sounding way than your average dude on the street. But he's still kind of doing that same thing as your average dude on the street does by bringing up Inuits or tribes or whatever.
The rest of us know that rice, dal, rajma, chana, other legumes, beans, vegetables, etc., which are the cheapest foods available in the market, are sufficient for a vegan diet.
Aditya, do you think that the Sentinelese on the Bay of Bengal have a supermarket saturated with fresh vegan produce? If so, then of course the necessary nutrition objection is off the market. But if, suppose, their only source of a certain vital nutrient is from an animal product, then either one, you're going to have to say that they have a special exception, which was my point all along, or two, you're going to have to tell them to, well, uninstall life.
No, does he have to? I'm sure this guy understands that veganism doesn't mean you die if you can't eat vegan, right? I'm sure he completely understands that survival is survival and you do what you need to do to survive, right? I mean, no, there's no vegan out there that's saying if you need to survive on animal products, die. Or if there are vegans out there saying that, then it's not a welcome opinion. And I can't believe that he's gone down this road of tribes, though. Like, come on, dude. That's we're back to nursery level anti-veganism again.
And since vegans already say that it's okay for them to harm innocent sentient beings if it's the only way that one can personally survive, and they do, again, which is through crop deaths, and this is the only reason I brought up crop deaths, then surely, by the same token, those unable to acquire adequate nutrition without consuming animal produce are equally permitted in doing so.
Yeah, but I think what the problem here actually is that he's referring to tribes and Aditya is referring to people who are deemed to not be able to go vegan by people like Stephen who have bigotry of low expectations, which is what Aditya's trying to say here. It's like simply assuming someone can't go vegan because of who they are is bigotry of low expectations. Like, I don't know if Stephen's done the research behind these tribes, but yeah, it's safe to assume that if you did do the research, there would be a lot of tribes that couldn't actually live eating plant-based. But to simply assume that none of them can, and maybe like not full tribal people, but let's say people who are living in rural areas, you know, to assume they can't is a bigotry of low expectation, or that they won't is a bigotry of low expectation as well. Right? Because that's what Aditya's trying to say. Because people, for example, people are often in the West will say that people in India can't go vegan. And India's a massive country with billions of people. Of course, there are people in India who can go vegan. A very, very, very high amount of people in India can go vegan. But this bigotry of low expectations is what leads people to say, well, no, everyone in India is poor and they need to be cared for and treated like babies. That's what Aditya's arguing. He's not arguing that every single tribe out there can do it, right? That's not the argument. But I feel like that's kind of what Stephen's responding to as the arguments. Maybe they're just talking past each other at this point.
Now, to be clear, I don't think that this is a weakness for veganism.
Now, I do know that Stephen is not the kind to make an ad hominem, but in case you are watching this, Stephen, it is obvious that other people are watching this too. Therefore, I must make the following point. I live in India, a developing country, and for the first 22 years of my life, and I'm still 22 years old, by the way, I live in a disenfranchised part of this disenfranchised country. I lived in the northeastern region. You can Google it. I also belong to a marginalized indigenous tribe within this disenfranchised region of this disenfranchised country. So I am the disenfranchised within the disenfranchised within the disenfranchised. That's 3 layers. I only recently moved to Bangalore, but have been vegan for the last 6 years. I have never seen an avocado, I've never seen quinoa, I don't know what almond milk tastes like, and so on. So you can definitely be vegan even if you belong to a disenfranchised part of this world.
But Aditya, surely you can see that the fact that your disenfranchised circumstances were compatible with a vegan diet doesn't mean that all disenfranchised circumstances are compatible with a vegan diet.
But he's not saying that. He's not making that claim. He's just saying that it's bigotry of low expectations to assume that everybody like him or at similar positions to him who are disenfranchised by your standards. You can't just automatically assume they shouldn't or can't or won't go vegan. That's the point Aditya's saying. He's saying don't jump to conclusions. And if anything, you should always assume positively that these people would make an ethical decision, that they would do everything they possibly could, rather than just going straight for oh no, they're too disenfranchised to make an ethical decision. That's the bigotry he's talking about here. So, you know, I think the point seems to be going over his head a little bit.
With respect, you seem to have completely missed the point. Consider again Inuits. The Inuits have traditionally been fishers and hunters, and their typical diet consists of an absurdly high intake of fat. Now, let's suppose, even if it's not true, it doesn't matter for philosophical purposes, that, as of this moment, they will literally starve to death if they cannot consume animal produce. Well, we can ask, according to the vegan ethos, are they permitted in this circumstance to hunt and consume non-vegan produce? And all I was emphasizing is that if one defines necessity as that which is required to continue living, then it simply follows that, in principle, there are situations in which consuming animal produce is justified. And to really hammer this home, note that I wasn't saying that I think that this is morally correct. I was merely acknowledging that the vegan principle, the definition of necessity, entails this.
Right. I never thought that was any point of contention, to be honest with you, that if people need to eat animals to survive, then they should eat animals to survive. Like, if you're trying to say that, if you were a vegan trying to argue that, oh, if you need to eat animals to survive, you should just die, then you're not really. I don't see that catching on, guys. I don't see that catching on. I don't see the vegan ethics being a one that everybody's going to want to go for. Right. So, yeah, be aware of that. If that's what you feel like you want to go for, I wouldn't go for that. But I don't think anyone really does. So it's kind of a weird point to be arguing about.
From here, I raised another frequent pathway that's trodden in the dialectic, namely mental health. If we consider mental health as necessary, then this premise is not only subject to socio-economic circumstances, but also mental health. Edita took this as if I was endorsing this objection, despite the fact that I said several times throughout my video that I only have 2 objections and that I'd give them after covering the dialectic. Now, Edita emphasises that he is personally from a disenfranchised community, and goes on to provide some really good points against the mental health objection.
That my mental health, a little change to my mental health, a little change to my social circle, is not sufficient justification to take away the entire life of an innocent animal. It is not sufficient justification to put innocent animals through hell.
And for what it's worth, I broadly agree. But it still stands that if we define necessary as to include mental health, then we get situations in which some are permitted to consume animal produce. My pointing this out did not mean and does not mean that I endorse it.
What is that argument? Sorry. So wait, are we talking like mental health, as in someone feeling a bit down because they've gone vegan and they miss their animal products? I mean, what exactly what exactly are we referring to here? Like, do we really think that that's like worth considering? Like someone having a bit of I miss my animal products. I must have missed some context there, because that can't be possibly what he's saying.
As in, people who have these unique struggles are capable of understanding this. And to expect anything less than that is to espouse the soft bigotry of low expectations.
Yeah,
I think,
agreed.
Stephen, you're a good person. I think so because I have been watching you for the last 5 years. I think you're unintentionally espousing the soft bigotry of low expectation.
Well, I think you've misinterpreted me, and it's likely because you were so eager to respond. Now, I admit, of course, that I could have done a better job conveying this pathway, but since you're the only person who's accused me of such bigotry, I suspect that you might be wrong on this one.
And now that this has been pointed out to you...
Well, I mean, just because he's the only person who's watched your video and has the background, and said what he said, it doesn't mean he's wrong. Like if the majority agrees with you, that doesn't mean you're right. It just means that you've not come across someone who has the experience, the lived experience, like Aditya's come from a specific place with a specific life, his specific thoughts, specific influences in his life. He's interested in philosophy, and specifically the Western world, and also his Eastern world, and the conflicts and the contrasts, and this is what he specializes in. This is his thing. So, and he's vegan, and he has all of that background, and he's a big fan of the channel. How many people like him are there out there? Not so many. How many people like him are there out there who make YouTube videos? Now we're down to like a tiny little slim slither of people. So it shouldn't be a surprise that not many people have his opinion, right? So it's not like you can't just automatically say, well, I must be wrong because no one else said what he said. Well, of course, no one else said what he said. There's like no one else like him, right? It's not like, for example, for me, I mean, I'm a YouTuber. I'm from England. I make videos about veganism. There's, I don't have the same kind of background as Aditya, not even close. So there are a lot more of me out there, because I guess my experience is not as specific and not as specialized as his is. Let's say he has a very, very specific viewpoint that he's coming from that not a lot of people have, is what I'm trying to say. So it's no surprise, that he has a different view than everybody else who's watched your video. That's no reason to dismiss it.
I am very confident that you will drop the soft bigotry of low expectations. Thank you in advance. On the point of the soft bigotry of low expectations, it seems like you're espousing it, but It is also possible that I have misunderstood you, in which case, kindly clarify what you mean so that I can understand what you're trying to say when you make that point.
Well, I hope that the clarity I just gave is sufficient. If it isn't, though, kindly get in touch via email. I'm sure we can talk this out privately. Moving on, Aditya addresses my first objection to the stillman.
First off, just want to say that's pretty cool that he's saying that. Aditya should definitely reach out to him privately and get a response. I think that's a good idea. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Pretty reasonable guy.
Which tackles premise 1. That being, we shouldn't harm sentient beings unnecessarily. My objection was, and is, that this premise rests entirely on an implicit definition of unnecessary. More often than not, vegans say that something is unnecessary if it isn't required for humans to continue living. This is, indeed, precisely how they justify the death of innocent mice and moles for their crops. These deaths can't be avoided, and thus they are required for humans to continue living. And my objection is that this implicit premise, this presumption that we are justified in harming sentient creatures to maintain our own life,
that's also not entirely true. It's not like oh, that has to happen, so we do it. It's that it doesn't have to happen for crop production, but it does happen for crop production. It's not something that we're like, yeah, do it for crop production. It's something that's like out of control. It's something that we'd love to not do, but it happens regardless, unless until a day where we have an entirely different system. So it's not, yeah. So it's weird. It's like, it's not like you're happy to do it. I feel like the way he's putting it is like, vegans are happy to do this. It's like, no, vegans aren't happy to do this at all. We'd rather it didn't happen. And I think it's something that needs to be dealt with. I think first and foremost, when we consider what most crops are grown for, which is animal agriculture, I mean, getting animal agriculture ideally ended is going to save a lot of animals in the crop farming anyway. So yeah. A lot to talk about here, and I've lost my train of thought in exactly what I was trying to say. This is pretty heavy stuff, all right? Aditya had time to make a script and stuff, and so did this guy. I'm going live here. I'm going off the cuff, so just bear with me, all right?
is completely arbitrary. We don't, at least as far as I can see, have justification for it. It's a presupposition, and this is problematic for a multiplicity of reasons. Anyhow, here's what Aditya made of my objection. What does it mean to say that the deliberate acquisition of a product is necessary? Necessary for what? To again quote Doggett, if it is wrong to hurt chickens for meat, is it wrong to hurt mice and moles while harvesting crops?
Again, we'll get to this later because he makes that point again later on.
And again, I think Aditya is misinterpreting why I brought up this point. I didn't appeal to futility. I didn't endorse the crop death though nonsense. If it is wrong to harm workers in the production of meat, isn't it wrong to harm workers in the production of tomatoes?
Because the animals whose products you consume eat plants too, so significantly more workers are required for animal farming than for tomato farming. Again, veganism is about the realistic goal of reducing harm as far as is possible and practicable, not about the unrealistic and impossible goal of eliminating all harm from this world.
I know, and that's why I didn't espouse this crappy argument. You know, ironically, I expected people to get the nuance, but in hindsight, it seems that I probably should have opted for the bigotry of low expectation. Now, the following question might seem a little strange, but it's absolutely a fair philosophical query. How does the vegan determine that their life is worth more than the mice and moles sacrificed in their crops? If the avoidance of harm is so paramount, why does one human life supersede 1,000 mice or 1,000,000 insects?
Okay, I will tell you which one it is. It is necessary to be as healthy as one wishes to be as a vegan. I will tell you why.
Hold up. As healthy as one wishes to be as a vegan. So those Inuits we mentioned, if they can't survive in their climate on a vegan diet, are you saying that they should uninstall life? But more to the point, how precisely do you justify the continuation of your life at the expense of, in principle, infinite harm caused to infinite innocent sentient beings? That's the question, and my objection is that I don't think that vegans have a compelling answer. As someone who consumes a 95% vegan diet myself, I really wish that vegans did have such an answer, but by my lights, they just don't. This is why I brought up the objection. I think it's a really good one. It's a really big problem for veganism.
I'll tell you why in the current world scenario.
Wait, so his objection is, why is it okay for, well, in his words, to kill like a mouse for you to survive, is what he's trying to say. Well, it's a simple fact that it's unavoidable. Like, it's like when you go vegan, you're saying, right, I'm going to take away as many things as I can that cause like harms animals, right? That's what you're looking at, as many as possible. So you cut out the obvious ones, your meat, dairy, eggs, you cut out the clothing, you cut out the medicines that you know are tested on animals, that you know are continuously testing on animals. You're cutting out all the things that you can. And you get to the point where, right, you're stuck now. You're you either move out into the fucking forest and start growing all your own food, which is for most people, impossible, completely impractical, because people need to work, people have the money to shift out. They have fucking kids, they have responsibilities. So what's the next best thing, right? You eat plant-based products, and unfortunately, most of them, if not all of them, are coming from places where crop deaths happen, right? So you've made a huge jump by getting rid of like practically everything else that you could, and you constantly are figuring things out as you move forward as well. It's not like you're just like, okay, meat, dairy, eggs gone, medicine's gone, clothing gone, these clothing, tested animals, animal products, clothing, stuff like that, and then you're like, done, I'm a fucking vegan, that's it, I'm done forever. That's not how it is. You continue figuring things out, you continue moving forward, you continue to improve. Now the thing is, there's not many improvements that can be made after a certain point. Like if you live in a small town, yeah, you could probably get locally grown crop food-based foods that are, I don't know, locally farmed and that don't use these massive industrial methods. But if you don't live in a small town, then that becomes extremely difficult. Again, it becomes very, very impractical to do these things, for an individual. So you just do the best you bloody can after a certain point. And then you got to hope that, as I said earlier, once animal farming has significantly reduced, then of course crop deaths will significantly reduce as well, because most crops are grown to feed animals. I think you'd hope that the next logical step, I'd say, for vegans would to focus on, okay, crop farming methods and demand and protest for improvements in those areas to stop all these crop deaths. I mean, I guess the point is that I think he's looking at veganism as like a be-all, end-all. It's like the perfect... It's trying to treat it like it's this perfect thing that's going to like fix everything and is completely logically perfect in every way. And of course it's not. The concept is flawed. It is flawed, but that doesn't mean you throw it out. It doesn't mean you just throw it out like, okay, it has some hang-ups, it has some flaws, get rid of it. It's like, no, it's an ongoing thing. It's something that you can constantly improve on. It's something that you can keep moving forward on. You can keep trying to help each other. You can try to, help other vegans who are doing something, and you're like, I don't know if that's a good thing for animals. Like, hey, can I talk to you about this? Like, what do you think about this today? You help each other. You keep figuring things out. You try and become better people. When you don't just go, as I said, you don't just cut out the meat, dairy, eggs, and then boom, okay, I'm a vegan. Fuck everyone else. I don't care about wool. It's like, I just bought something wool from the shop. You know what I mean? You're not just like, other vegans weren't just like, oh yeah, fuck it, yeah, No, you talk and you say, hey, look, do you understand what wool comes from? And you teach and you learn. You go, oh fuck yeah, I didn't realize that. I am a vegan and I don't want to fund anything that hurts animals, so I'm gonna get rid of the wool. I'm gonna stop buying wool from now on. You know what I mean? So you keep improving, guys. It's not a finite thing. It's not just done. There's always going to be better ways as technology improves as well. We adapt and we have better ways of doing things. So yeah, that would be my response to that. I don't know why he's trying to treat it as some kind of thing that yeah, I think I've said what I needed to say though.
It is justifiable to preserve one human life over that of 1,000 mice and moles. I'm not sure where you're getting these numbers, but let's grant it, because the specificity of the numbers are not the point here. This is justified because the process of mindlessly killing mice and moles in the production of crops has to do with the fact that we live in a non-vegan, speciesist, human supremacist world. And in this non-vegan, speciesist, human supremacist world, we just don't care about animals that much. And therefore, killing animals is a part of crop production. The solution to this is to get to a vegan, non-speciesist, non-human supremacist world. If vegans all gave up their lives to save the lives of 1,000 mice and moles, there would be no Earthling Eds or Joey Armstrongs or Cosmic Skeptics arguing for veganism. And the rest of the world simply wouldn't go vegan because there's no one to convince them to do it.
So Adita claims that we're justified in harming mice and moles because, at least as of this moment, doing so is the only way we can survive. But notice that this simply is not a response to my objection. It's not an answer to my question. Sure, if we assume that we must survive and that we must do so causing minimal harm, then crop deaths are just the price of the current best solution. But we're still assuming, as a brute fact it seems, that we must survive. Why? Why is your life, Adita, in principle, worth more than 1,000 mice and moles? What's your justification?
That's a really funny argument, because it seems like what he's trying to say is the thing is the opposite to this, that you're asking him to justify. So you're saying, Aditya, justify why you should not end your life right now. Justify it. And it's like, I understand this is philosophy YouTube, so they get into this type of topic. But I mean, this kind of thing just comes as common sense to the average Joe, doesn't it? It's like, because I want to live, because I want to survive, because that's just what I am. The same as all animals want to survive and will do anything they can to survive and would rather not be dead. I mean, and you got to do what you've got to do to survive. And that's basically, it's not, I understand that that's not a sufficient answer in a philosophical debate. I understand that. But I mean, that's just, it's a matter of for the average Joe, for your, Joe Blogs, it's a common sense point. I guess he's asking you right now to justify your existence. And it's like, I mean, it's going down a road where it's like, it gets very deep very quickly. And I wouldn't go down it personally, because I'm not into philosophy YouTube. I'm sure there's a lot of vegan philosophy buffs that would go down this road, but I would just stick to the common sense notion of, because we do what we need to do to survive, because it is what it is. I think survival is paramount at the end of the day.
You can't just say that your life supersedes theirs, because if it didn't, you wouldn't be able to continue living. No, you need to explain why your life is worth more.
If vegans just got by, if vegans just barely managed to live, if they got terribly malnourished, then there would be no one who would take seriously the Earthlingettes, the Joey Armstrongs, and the cosmic skeptics of this world.
Yes, if vegans didn't presuppose that their life is worth more than the innocent mice and moles that they pay to be harmed, then we wouldn't have Earthling Ed or Cosmic Skeptic.
They're not paying. This is such a deceiving way of putting it. They're not paying for mice and moles to be harmed. They're paying for vegetables and plant foods. And farmers harm animals to protect their vegetables from those animals. That's something a farmer chooses to do but does not need to do. There are ways to do it that don't require harming those animals, but they don't choose those ways because of what cost, efficiency, time, whatever. Vegans are not paying them to do that. Vegans are paying for the vegetables. And unfortunately, that's what the farmers are choosing to do. So there's a little bit deceptive way of putting it.
Agreed. But this doesn't explain at all why vegans are justified in presupposing that their life is worth more than all of the innocent mice and moles. And that's the objection. Further still, and crucially, note that you're drawing an arbitrary line even within veganism. If the avoidance of harm is the goal, then drawing the line at basic survival, malnutrition, is the conclusion. But no, you're providing a utilitarian argument to justify drawing the arbitrary line at a certain level of nutritional and mental health. And if you're drawing arbitrary lines, then it becomes quite difficult, does it not, to object to the arbitrary lines of others. To illustrate this principle, suppose an ethical vegan was lost at sea with shipmates. If harming sentient beings can be justified in the name of continuing one's existence, then the vegan would eventually be justified in killing a shipmate for sustenance. Hell, with time, they'd be justified in killing everyone on the ship.
Yes, that would be the case. What is the confusion? I would eat a human being in order to survive, and believe it or not, so would you, given the circumstances.
I think you're a bit confused here, Edita, because you seemingly are contradicting yourself. Just a moment ago, you said that one is only justified in being as healthy as they can while being vegan.
It is necessary to be as healthy as one wishes to be as a vegan.
Which left those poor Inuits in trouble. But now you're saying that if you couldn't survive without harming innocent human beings, you would.
I don't think he understands what vegan means. I don't think he understands that it's not like it's so interesting that I think he thinks it's some kind of extremely strict diet that you're not able to like move. So for example, in the definition of it, and as we all know, and as well, my position on it is that like I don't really give a shit about, to be honest with you, about like what's vegan or what's not vegan when it comes down to it. Like, what is or isn't veganism, who is or isn't vegan. It's about whether or not that person is causing the harm to animals that could be avoided, right? Simple as that. So if you don't need to eat meat, you don't need to eat eggs, you don't need to eat all these things, which you don't, which most people don't, then don't do it, right? Simple as that. Now, if you do need to do those things to be healthy and survive, then you do it. Right? It's simple as that to me. I couldn't give less of a fuck about whether someone is then considered a vegan or not a vegan in that circumstance. I don't care. I use the word vegan, and I talk about veganism as a way to get a message across that people recognize, that they understand, that they can see the product at the supermarket has the word vegan on it. It's a branding thing to me. It's not That's pretty much all I kind of use it as. It's just an easy way to get a message across to most people understand what veganism means. When it comes down to it and boils down to like the philosophy and this kind of person behind it, it's like he's stuck on this definition in his head that vegan means that somebody shouldn't be eating this or shouldn't be eating that, shouldn't do, no matter what. And it's like, no, that's not what Aditya's saying. And this is where the confusion's coming in.
Would eat a human being in order to survive.
But more to the point, and this is something you've done on your channel on numerous occasions, vegans tend to take the principles of non-vegans and then show that these principles entail an awful outcome. For instance, if we base rights on intelligence, then this entails that many humans won't have rights. This is a very effective, albeit abrasive, way to get non-vegans to reconsider their principles. And what my objection effectively does is flip the script. The vegan principle that something is unnecessary if it isn't required to continue one's survival entails that, given the right circumstances, we're justified in inflicting infinite suffering to infinite sentient beings, including other humans. This realization made me reconsider. Put it this way, a principle that's compatible with infinite suffering being inflicted on innocence has surely gone wrong somewhere.
Why go to this length to it's almost, there's a word for this, I don't know what it is, but it's like, it's just going to such extreme lengths to try to argue against something that is just trying to help. Like, why? Like, why do you need to go balls deep into philosophy to come to a conclusion list? Like, he said he's 95% eating plant-based foods. Like, why are you going to this extreme length here to try to justify not eating 100% plant-based foods? Like, you know for a fact that animal products cause an incredible amount of suffering and harm to animals. You know that for a fact. And you know for a fact that eating plant-based causes significantly less. So why, at this point, are you engaging in such a deep level of argumentation and trying to play these philosophical games and mental gymnastics to justify this? I just don't understand it. I mean, I get it. He's a philosophy channel, right? I get it. So there's some element of this where I understand that he's just doing it because it's a philosophy channel. It's interesting, blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, it's like he's not like he's a vegan and he's getting into it with another vegan. He's like, he is trying to justify, it seems to me, what he's doing right now. Or it's just for the sake of content, maybe. I don't know. It's hard to see, to be honest with you. But as he's not a vegan, it does seem like he's just trying to desperately come up with stuff to justify himself.
So it seems like I have addressed your first objection.
I really wish you had, but no, you haven't. You haven't justified why, in principle, your life is worth more than an infinite amount of suffering caused to an infinite number of innocent beings.
So he's got this infinite number of suffering to infinite beings because Aditya said, we do, for survival, it's okay to kill for survival. But he never said that it's okay to kill an infinite number of beings for survival. It's not like, oh, do an infinite number of suffering for survival. It's not what he said. This is what this guy's inferred from what he said. There's some nuance he's missed. When I'm sure, 100% sure that when you say you need to do for survival, it doesn't mean you go out of your way to cause as much suffering as possible. It means you do what you need to do for survival, right? It means you do what's necessary for survival. That doesn't entail like you just go out and kill indiscriminately and just fucking wipe out entire races of animals or humans or whatever. That's not the argument Aditya's making, and he's never specifically said that or anything close to that. He's just jumped to a conclusion here that that's what Aditya's saying, so that to make his argument seem like sensical, basically, to seem it makes sense.
Rather, you've merely illustrated that you assume this implicit premise. You've illustrated what I've pointed out as a problem. From here, Aditya addresses my second objection to the Stillman, which tackles premise 1, that being we shouldn't harm sentient beings unnecessarily. I began by drawing a link between utilitarianism and veganism, emphasizing that vegans tend to uphold this premise through utilitarian principles, and from there I argued that utilitarians have misdiagnosed the software we're running. I don't think we're running the patch we shouldn't harm sentient beings unnecessarily, but rather we shouldn't harm our kin unnecessarily, and the recognition of this makes much, much more sense of historical and contemporary moral differences. And here's how Aditya responded.
You say that the vegan argument is not sound on the basis of what evolution by natural selection has built into us.
No, I acknowledged the link between ethical veganism's emphasis on sentience and utilitarianism, and then argued that since utilitarians misdiagnose our intuitions and social software, the sentient premise in ethical vegan arguments is on shaky ground. Ground that is not consistent, I argued, with reality. I didn't issue a rebutting defeater. I did not argue that veganism is not sound.
That seems slightly different than what you said you would be proving on the outset. You said you aren't providing an argument against ethical veganism, but it seems like you very much are.
As I made clear before bolstering the ethical altruism argument, ethical vegan arguments come in many different forms, each possessing different premises and conclusions. So if one was to give an argument against ethical veganism just outright, then they'd need to account for a great many considerations, and this I did not do. To the contrary, I focused on one single argument. Yes, it's what I consider to be the strongest, but it's still just one argument.
Unless I have misunderstood you, in which case, do let me know.
Alright, I'll give it a go. Suppose I was responding to what I consider to be the best cosmological argument for God's existence, and I tackled the first premise by arguing that it effectively misdiagnoses crucial facts. In doing this, would it be correct to say that I'm giving an argument against cosmological arguments? No, it wouldn't, because my objection would only be relevant to the cosmological arguments that contain that premise. If they don't contain that premise, then it just wouldn't be relevant. I hope that makes more sense.
Anyway, since you are trying to provide an argument against ethical veganism, let me try to knock it down as best as I can. The thing is that evolution by natural selection is descriptive. It is not prescriptive.
Yeah, I know. Hence I was describing the origin of our moral intuitions. I was not prescribing moral acts.
Or to put it in another way, it tells us how we got here, but it is fallacious to argue on the basis of that how we should be while we are here. That would be social Darwinism, something we rightly reject in ethics.
Agreed, and that's one of the many reasons I didn't commit the foul you're accusing me of.
To put it in yet another way, it tells us what is. It is fallacious to base on that what ought to be. Stephen, you're committing the is-ought fallacy.
Or you, editor, have misinterpreted why I brought up evolution by natural selection. As is always the case, I appreciate that I could have worded things a bit better, but to walk away thinking that I was endorsing social Darwinism is frankly insulting. I mean, was my communication really that bad?
I know, Stephen, that you have criticized Dr. Sam Harris for trying to get an ought from an is, but you're doing the exact same thing, Stephen. You're pulling a Sam Harris. Stephen, you ought to stop.
Well, to reiterate, 1, I was addressing a specific argument, not issuing an argument against veganism. 2, I didn't provide a moral framework at all. I was entirely in the realm of description. And 3, I didn't endorse even one prescription. Not one. All I did was explain, that is, describe facts that account for our intuitions. I did not say that these intuitions are therefore correct, but I do acknowledge that my words could have been better selected. Anyhow, when wrapping up, I noted that as a vegetarian I won't eat moles, but when I reflect upon the moles that perish in crop deaths for my predominantly vegan diet, I'm not tremendously bothered by this. Seeming inconsistencies such as this are, I argue, better explained by the kinship implicit definition. But Adita interpreted me again as giving the crop death though argument against veganism, which I wasn't. Why don't I lose sleep over killing moles for my crops?
Yeah, I have already addressed the crop death though argument, so let's move on.
And I've already explained that I wasn't endorsing the crop death though argument. I brought it up in both cases, not as an argument or objection to veganism, but merely to substantiate the premise that all diets necessitate death. My circle of altruism is completely inconsistent. But that's the thing, that's what I was expressing in the prior chapter. I don't think that our moral software is consistent.
Yes, Stephen, you're being very much inconsistent. And I think that you should respect yourself enough to know that you can be morally consistent. I know I certainly respect you enough to know that you can be morally consistent.
Well, if you respect me, good sir, then when you interpreted me as being bigoted, endorsing social Darwinism, and championing the crappy-croppy argument, why didn't you second-guess your interpretation? Now, while I think you've dropped the ball...
Because people who think they're really, really, really smart, like this guy, and who often are really, really, really smart, like this guy, fall to pieces when they're challenged on vegan ethics every single time. So that's why I did just, rightly or wrongly, jump to a conclusion that you're just desperately trying to defend yourself, defend your habits rather than changing them. Because that's what, in his experience and my experience and most vegans' experience, is what most people do, especially smart people. So that's why. It's not like he thinks you're an asshole or something. He just thinks that you are, which you seem to be, like most other people when it comes to this topic, they just fall to pieces.
Well, a few times I also acknowledge that you've expressed some really good points, and I just want you to know that I am sincerely grateful for the interaction. Thank you. And on that note, as always, thank you kindly for...
Fair enough. And at the end of the day, like, look, he's not anywhere near as bad as some of the jokers and some of these, carnivore clowns that we come across. And he points out there's some good points in there that I agree with, especially that first point. But yeah, at the end of the day, unfortunately, he does come out with a few of the points that you hear from like your average Joe on the street, albeit a little bit smartened up, let's say. A little bit like spruced up, like Sam Harris does it. A few others do it as well. They kind of like saying the same stuff as somebody in the street would say, except they polish it and make it sound a lot more smart and intelligent, and then people believe it or whatever. But I did a good job for responding, and good that you got a response back, and I hope you'll do another response, because I think it's a good thing to keep it going. Clearly there's some attention going here. Go wherever the eyes are going, like get the most eyes on this. Get your eyes on, get as many eyes on animal rights, animal rights ethics, vegan ethics as you can. I think it's always a good way to go. Absolutely.